Hey guys, so this is for those of you who joined my in-person watercolor portraiture workshop today. So to kind of keep us focused on painting, because drawing portraits is difficult enough, I've made some stamps that we're going to be using today based on the Asaro head. And I'll explain a bit in class what an Asaro head is and why it's useful. But basically, in watercolors, because our paint blends, it can be useful to think of the face as a simplified geometric structure. The contours are going to blend in any event, so you're not necessarily going to end up with a blocky sort of image like this when you apply it to practice. And that'll make a little bit more sense as we move along. I'll also go over skin color. So in previous classes, I've explained skin color is brown, essentially, of different concentrations. Some browns have a bit of red in it and are very dilute. Some have more of a blue tint, but if you think of skin tone as brown, it makes things a lot easier, just a single color. So we're going to be experimenting with a couple different combinations and a couple different techniques as we warm up towards our final portrait. I'm going to start by mixing up some purple that I'm going to use for a glazed layer. This technique is called wet on dry because I'm painting on dry paper. This can be a good technique to use if you want really precise lines, or if you're worried that your paper is going to become oversaturated when you paint. I'm using a very thin layer, and I'm painting in the darker areas that I can see on the Asaro head. And you're going to have a little Asaro head to practice with in the class today, but you can also find references online. So if you just look up Asaro head or Planar head online, you'll find that there are a couple of websites that will allow you to rotate a virtual Asaro head. My favorite one was recently taken offline. I don't quite know why. It was on ArtStation, but you could also adjust the light. But just thinking and practicing painting the head in a planar structure is going to be super useful. In fact, I find that this is the most useful thing to know in watercolor portraiture, to get to know the Asaro head. So, either look them up online, buy one, but practice, because with watercolors, kind of the beautiful thing about watercolor portraiture, and also the most difficult thing, is that it requires an artist's interpretation. You're not always going to get all the details you need from a photograph, so sometimes you need to rely on your knowledge of what the head actually looks like, or what the planes of the face actually are when you're doing your painting. And even painting using this knowledge rather than just relying on a photograph can make something that feels more real than what you would get just by relying from your photos. So this first layer I've done in purple. If you're at home, you can use a quinacridone violet for this. That's a very good mixing color that we'll be using later today as well. And since this is a glazing technique, I'm going to add another layer. So glazing basically means you put down one color first, let it dry a bit, put down another layer. And I'm using purple and orange together to create a dynamic brown. The useful thing about a two-tone brown, so making your own instead of just using one out of the tube, is that you can adjust the warmth or coolness of the skin tone as you go along. To make the skin tone cooler, so say in a shadow there's a cooler skin tone, you simply add more of the cool color, in this case purple. And to make it warmer, you add more of the warm color, in this case orange. So these are going to blend together to create a sort of browned skin tone. If I want to cool some of these areas, I can either come in just with plain purple, or with a mixture that I've made by adding the two together. So this is what you get when you add the two together. You get a whole range of different browns, in fact, adding these two. So if I add more orange to it, I get sort of a lighter brown. It'll get cooler the more purple I add. So you can create a whole range of really great colors just out of this combination. So I can come in any area that's darker and just sort of dot in some of this darker color. You'll notice that the wetter the paper is, the more your paint is going to sort of travel on the page. Sometimes that's a good thing. It can make really sort of dreamy, loose silhouettes and portraits. Sometimes not ideal if you're going for precision. So it's just about kind of understanding what effects you can achieve using watercolors and appreciating the medium in part for the fact that it is so unpredictable. That's one of the beautiful things about watercolors is they're not completely controllable. They're not completely predictable. So often you'll discover things as you move along in painting that create really dynamic compositions. Okay, so now we'll move on to another color combination. And this time we'll mix the colors beforehand and add them both by dropping in and simply painting to our portrait. And this time we're going to use a wet on wet technique. So I'm lightly wetting down the portrait to start with clear water. You can sort of dab this off with a paper towel. And the colors I'm going to use are going to be the brown and the red. And these two colors create a really wonderful range of skin tones that you can adjust in intensity by simply diluting. So we're going to do sort of a paler skin tone here. But we can get skin tones all the way from this to paler tones. For this, the brown is actually the cooler tone. So even though it's not purple, with colors, everything is relative. So red is going to be warmer than the brown. So the brown is going to be the cooling value in this one. So I'm going to mix my paints together first. And start painting onto the page. So you'll notice that when you paint on wet paper or damp paper, you're able to create smoother gradients. This is called sizing the paper. It also helps prevent buckles if you actually wet the entire paper. But I don't recommend doing this with just any paper at home, just because most student brands of paper aren't particularly high GSM or resilient. So there is a limit to how many brush strokes and how much water you can put on your paper. And sometimes with student brands, you simply don't have that much leeway for wetting down your page. So as a beginner, it's good practice to start working on dry paper, building up the layers. It'll give you more room, more attempts to get it right, because, chances are you're not going to get a perfect gradient at the first go. Then once you're a little bit more confident in your brush strokes, you can try wetting the paper. What's nice about these Anna Linky watercolors is that they dry true to color. So I'm able to do more techniques like wet on wet or glazing with them on student paper than I would otherwise. So just something to consider. Okay, now this is looking a little bit red to me, so I'm going to just add in some browns while the paint's still wet. And since I know the shadow underneath the chin is going to be brown, so a cooler color, I'm going to put more browns into the neck. So for some of you, this is all you'll be able to get done in the time we have for the class today. But for anyone who does finish their planar heads, we can move on to the space next to them to try to actually do this on plain paper, freehand. You're welcome to use a pencil if you'd like, or just to experiment, you can come in with a paint. I'm going to use the brown-red mixture for this one. And I'm just following exactly the planar head that I have to the side, adding more water to create a gradient where I'd like it. And you'll notice that I'm painting all the way into the eyes, which seems very strange, but the truth is the eyes, even the whites of the eyes, pick up all the colors around them. So usually you will have part of the skin tone in the gray that makes up the color of the eyes. And now I'm going to experiment with tone. So for this brown red combination, I need a cooler tone to help me sort of bring this color down. So I'm going to start with the brown, but then I'm going to mix the brown with a little bit of blue. I'm going to use the phthalo blue here to make a gray that I can put in the areas where the eyes are going to be. And this combination of brown and blue is going to be useful for any areas that I want a little bit darker. And painting with watercolor is all about sort of having an idea of how quickly your paints are drying and what the different layers are going to look like. So it takes some time to kind of get that balance. having a hairdryer on hand can be very useful. And I'm gonna add in some more tints around the lips. So one lovely thing that sort of happens in the light with faces is that the colors from the lips kind of bounce off the nose. So you can get a really kind of nice luminance by bouncing some of the colors that you see in the lips off of the nose. Now I'll make some dark brown hair, just mixing together the blue and brown. Once the paper's really, really dry, and my paper isn't, so this is going to move around a little bit more than I'd like. But if you have the chance to let your paper dry a little bit more, that'll work better. You can come in and get some of these sharper details down. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because it's too wet to really add details, but just experimenting here, working on the planar head, and then we'll move on to our final full-size portrait. Thanks for watching.